Hey everyone, it's our third and final discussion with Jonathan Twomley today. And this one is going to be really I don't know, a word of caution, a warning to anybody who is a limited partner in multifamily, really commercial assets. We are both, Jonathan and I, seeing deals blow up now. It is very painful to see people lose their equity, their hard-earned money. So we have some warnings, some things to look at for now to maybe get ahead of it. So Jonathan, this is an important topic for people.
Yeah. So the background to this is I've been hearing this for a couple of years, but in recent days I've been hearing a little bit more where people are telling me, hey, I'm in a deal and not getting distributions, or hey, I'm in a deal and it looks like I may actually lose my equity, which is, when you think about like how, generally speaking, how safe and stable an apartment building is as an asset, it's kind of hard to imagine what you have to do
Yeah. How many
to
things have to go against you to
right
lose that?
now one thing can be like a bad recession where your people stop paying rent. That can be one, right?
Mhm.
But usually what it is not just that. It is that you paid too much for the asset in the first place.
I mean,
And
I mean, you're being too kind. I would say most of the deals I'm hearing people put together that were good for the GP, meaning fees, but they just flat out overpaid, in my
well,
opinion.
yeah, I mean, and look, the market has frankly lost its mind, right? And the reason I say that is because now there's this adage that like the military is always preparing to fight the last war,
Yeah.
right? And the analogy in economics is like investors are always prepared to fight the last recession.
Mm-hmm.
Economists are always preparing for the last recession. And so, coming out of the great financial crisis, multifamily did super well for a whole bunch of factors that are not going to repeat themselves, but people generally look at things on a very superficial level and they say, oh, look how well it did. That's good enough for me. Multifamily is safe. I'm rushing into that asset. And so people have bid up the price of these assets over the last several years and continuing to do so now because of a whole bunch of other things that are going on, like, yields on, treasuries being
Sub
nothing.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. The stock market being at all-time highs and that making people nervous. So multifamily looks relatively good in comparison. And maybe it is, but the problem is because there's so much attention being paid to it, uh, and especially since about 2016, when I saw things really start to kind of ramp up in terms of interest, people have paid a lot for these assets. They paid a lot more on a risk-adjusted basis than they had paid historically in the past. And now some of that is coming home to roost, because if you pay more for the asset, your debt carrying costs are higher relative to your income, right?
Yep.
And so, and your biggest expense is going to be your debt service, right? That is going to be about a quarter of your income, right there, just that one
Mm-hmm.
payment. The next biggest one being taxes, which you can't do anything about, right? So, and then labor. So those are like your three biggest expenses. But if you, but the taxes are also proportional to the
Mm-hmm.
cost, right? That's going to also rise when you pay more.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the labor cost is not going to rise because you paid more, but the two biggest costs, your debt service and your taxes, are both related to how much you paid for the asset. And the more you pay for the asset, the more you pay for those two things. So what happens is if you buy at the top of the market and you overpay, you are leaving yourself very, very little, room for error when something goes wrong. And now what you're seeing is stuff going wrong in terms of rent collections to some, it depends on what level of assets you're bought, but also, when you say rent collections are down by 1.5% across the board, doesn't sound so bad. That's the national average, right?
Mm-hmm.
That means that there are buildings doing worse than that,
For
right?
sure.
And if you overpaid for the asset and you left yourself very little room for error, if your collections are down by 3 or 4%, that might be enough to really screw with your ability to pay your distributions, and your ability ultimately to pay your debt service. And on top of that, if you have anything go wrong with the asset, any kind of unexpected capital item, right, that you haven't reserved for, you're really in a pinch. Now, the other thing that's happening is about 2017, we started seeing a lot of debt being issued with interest only, right? Not interest only for the whole term, although I actually have heard of some of those.
Oh, wow.
But interest only for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, right? Now, interest only has always played a role because if you wanted to do a rehab, you're spending a lot of cash in that first year and you have a lot of vacancy, and you need some extra cushion to get you over that first year while you're carrying out your plan. So interest only is not, there's nothing wrong with it, like in the abstract, right? It serves a role. What you started seeing though, a couple of years ago, was interest only being issued so that people could make the deal work, right? Not to get through a rehab, but actually literally so that the deal would meet the debt service coverage requirements set by the lenders. And the lenders are complicit in this.
Wow.
Because the lenders are actually offering IO because they can't get deals done otherwise. Fully amortizing loans cannot meet the threshold required to issue the loans, given the prices that are being paid.
You know how frightening this is to me? I mean, again, because I went through the last crisis and back to whole you're fighting the last war. That is exactly what happened the last 18 months of my single family homes from 2008 to 2009. Countrywide, IndyMac don't exist anymore because that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
They would do what was called 2 and 28s. They would do a 2-year, like 1.9% to make the deal work. And the whole idea is refi after 2 years.
Right.
And if you can't, the interest rate went to like 7.5.
I remember that because I was buying our apartment right around that time, right before the crash was when we bought our place. And I remember talking with lenders and like, oh yeah, we can give you 2 years of interest only. And like, and I was like, why would I want that? Like, I want to build equity. I don't want to just pay the bank. Plus I don't want to like, plus also I understood how these things worked. It's like, I'm not going to go and like buy a house based on like what I can afford without paying off any principal and then have the thing reset on me in 2 years and have my payment double. Like, I don't want that. So
well, you were smart. There were a lot of people that didn't. And hence we had the single family housing crash.
And so the single family lenders then stopped doing that. They increased their standards, right? This is part of what then fed into the multifamily frenzy, was that it got so tough to buy a house that then people had to rent, because now they were like, you got to have 20% down, no teaser rates, no interest only, right? So, but now, so that drove the money flows, right? So the money that was going into single family then went into multifamily, because multifamily was like the safest. Look how good it did. Everybody was renting. It's the safest thing ever. So then, that caused the multifamily market to run up so high that lenders, now back in the great financial crisis too, leverage got out of control for multifamily assets as well. And what they allowed you to do was put a second mortgage on, so they would lend you your 75% or 80%. Actually, 80 was very typical. They'd lend you the 80%, and then they would let you put on mezzanine debt, right, to increase your leverage. So I remember when I first got into the business, I was talking to loan brokers and like, oh yeah, I can get you 93% leverage. I'm like, why do I don't want 93% leverage. Like it's insane. So, but that's what they were offering to do. And now that also got stopped. The lenders got more conservative. They dropped, they stopped handing out 80% loans. They went down to 75%. They imposed these debt service coverage, requirements. They put in all kinds of guarantees that you had to sign, to make it safer. But what happened was, as the market ran up, they ran out of business, right? They couldn't lend anymore. So they figured out ways to stay within these restrictions, without, but still do deals. And the solution to that was interest only, right? So that allowed them to still meet, actually started seeing a little more 80% loans again, rather than just 75. But that allowed them to like make deals work for you by doing interest only which I said used to be a device just to help you doing a rehab deal or repositioning.
Now it just became standard.
But now
operating.
it just became the only way to get loans issued was to fudge the numbers. So it's essentially offering much higher leverage, right?
Yeah.
With, and plus on top of that, what you're seeing now. So you've got these interest only loans that are resetting, and that first vintage of them, that first tranche from 2017, 2018, a lot of those loans were just 2 or 3 years of IO.
Right.
Now you're going into, full amortization at the same time as collections are getting soft and maybe getting softer. And if all the CARES Act money runs out, this is why, when you read the articles about like the rent tracker articles, like rent collections are great. There's always a paragraph in every single one of those articles where somebody from the apartment industry is screaming about Congress better come up with more money, right? If they were, and I'm on my soapbox now, you can tell, but I see this all the time. I've been seeing recently the resilience of multifamily, right?
Yeah.
Multifamily has done well during COVID. It's the most resilient asset out there. Well, listen, the government is paying everybody to pay their rent, right? It's not because multifamily does well in a recession. This is, we're in some kind of like never land right now, where we're in this recession and there are all these people who are unemployed, but they've gotten these huge checks from the government. They're able to pay their rent. And this is not reality, right? Reality
this is very scary. I know you have a call in about 9 minutes, so I want to make sure we kind of summarize some action items for folks. First, if you're a limited partner in a deal already, you have to call your GP and see if you are in your interest only period and when it resets. Is that a fair thing to ask?
Yeah, I'd say you want to know, because and hopefully you're dealing with an operator who's very conservative, who's well reserved, has been anticipating.
You're going to find out
this moment. But if they're not adequately reserved and you're about to tick into that period where you're going to full amortization, right? Cash is going to be constrained in this asset, and chances are your distributions are not going to be what they were, right?
Yeah. So first question, are you in IO, interest only? And when does it reset? Because we started this third video, I'm hearing about deals that have switched, and the step one of that is they're not getting their returns anymore, either monthly or quarterly.
Yep.
Right. That's step one of the pain curve.
Yeah. Step two of the pain curve is when the sponsor comes to you for a capital call because they need cash.
And that could be for anything. It could be for higher vacancies. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I just got to shut this off.
Yeah, it could be for higher vacancies. It could be for repairs. Unexpected. It could be lack of reserves. I mean, a capital call is coming to some of the LPs out there for sure.
Yeah. And then the third step is, if you can't make the debt service because it's been reset, and people don't come through with the capital call, or they burn through that money on the capital call and they still can't make the debt service, then you're talking about going into default and foreclosure. Now, I'm expecting that some of these IO loans the banks may have no choice but to extend the IO.
Extend and pretend, yeah.
Yeah, they may have to just rewrite them, but some of these things can't be rewritten. I mean, CMBS loans are almost impossible to rewrite. The agency loans too. I mean, if they're securitized, this is the problem. All this depends on securitization, right? These loans are being resold to investors.
This is just like the single family home.
Yeah. And when they're resold, it's very difficult to modify them, right?
Of course.
Because they're part of this package of loans that have been sold to investors who are their expectation is we're locking in this cash flow. And it may be a very low rate of return that they're getting, but it's supposed to be basically guaranteed, riskless. Like as safe as a treasury bond, or like better, because maybe you don't even trust the US government anymore, right? So that's why it's very, very difficult to
same as single family back in 2008, same deal.
To rewrite these loans.
That's why it just kept rolling.
Yeah, but I think they're going to have to. I think they're going to have to.
So help me understand. This is so the pain curve, right? Know when it resets, not going to get your returns, capital raise, technical default, loss of equity. How fast could that happen? Because that's what I don't understand. I know it for single family, let's say the IO switched to full payment December 1st, right? You suddenly wouldn't get your payments, your preferred return probably. So that's probably an immediate impact.
Yeah.
Then what? A capital call is like a month or two out after that, and then foreclosure after that. What's the time lag, you think?
Well, it really depends on how
Reserve.
on how well reserved you are, or how,
Okay.
or if the cash flow, if you're making your debt service, that is obviously good. But what can happen is if you fall below that magic 1.25%, 1.25 times, debt service coverage ratio, the lender is going to take control of the bank accounts. Yep. So even if you're paying your debt service, they're not going to wait till you get to an actual default before they step in. So if you drop below that threshold that they require you to meet, they're going to come in and they're going to take all of your cash flow, and they're going to say, give us a budget of your operating expenses, and we're going to pay you that number every month. And the rest of it, we're going to keep.
Yep.
And they're going to keep it until you get back over a higher hurdle. So not just the 1.25, but you've got to get to the 1.3, and you've got to do it for 2 quarters, right? Usually this is on a quarterly basis. So you miss it 1 quarter or maybe 2 quarters, depending on your loan docs. 1 or 2 can put you into cash management. But then to get out, you've got to meet a higher threshold for 2 consecutive quarters, right? And then if you fall again, you're back in cash management. So if you get out of it, if you're successful, then the bank will give you this huge check of all the money that they've been collecting on your behalf, and then you can pay everybody. But there are properties that stay in cash management forever, and that means that maybe at the end of the deal you're going to get a check that's going to, But if you were down below that 1.25 threshold all along, you're not going to make a lot of money. And here's the real killer. So because the bank is, and I think this is probably what's happening to folks, this is why you see capital calls. If the bank is taking all of your cash, they're only distributing operating income to you or operating expenses to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if there's any unexpected CapEx?
Oof.
Right? What happens if you need to replace a roof? What happens if you need to replace a whatever it is? Then, well, there's no money in the till unless you have really big reserves. So you've got to go to your investors and say, okay, we need $100,000 for new roofs on this building, or whatever the case is.
Wow.
And even if you have an insured loss, you've got your deductible, you may have to spend some of the money first, right? Whatever it is, that's when the real pain happens, because that cash may be sitting in the bank, but you can't get it. The bank is going to say, you go get it from your investors.
Right.
And then you start having problems, because then you've got investors who are like, well, I just lost my job, or I'm worried about the economy.
Do it. They can't.
I can't do it. And so then these things can unravel. So this is why, the mythology that multifamily is safe is dangerous, right? Yep. It's dangerous to think an asset is safe.
Totally agree. All right, folks, man, it's really scary to me to see the similarities going on in multifamily with what I experienced up close and personal in 2008. That's frightening. So thank you, Jonathan, for your time this week. I know you got an 11:30. So any closing thoughts?
Well, I just want to we're not there yet, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we're not at 2008 with multifamily. I don't want anybody to freak out. So we're not having a crash yet, but I'm just saying this is how deals can unravel. And when you're buying at the top of the market with very little margin, it can happen much more easily. So just, buyer beware, really understand how these deals are structured and how much cushion you've got. And I think if you're going to go into a deal, probably the first thing you want to look at is how much of a reserve they're building in, right? Because that's going to be, when the other margins are low, your cash flow margin is thin, you got to have a pile of cash to fall back on.
There you go. Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for your week. We will talk next week.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.